I'd like to just very quickly look at the research evidence now pertaining to students who have risk profiles and who are in the context of bilingualism. Let me just tell you right off the bat that the punchline is that there is no research evidence suggesting that these students are at higher risk in dual language context. So all of the research evidence that we have is showing us that children with developmental language disorder, autism spectrum disorder, Down syndrome, dyslexia are not further disadvantaged. And you're going to see that they may even be advantaged in certain specific areas. So here, firstly, is the research on children with developmental language disorder that found that the profile of difficulties is the same and the severity of the difficulty is the same, whether you hear one or two languages. Now, we also have the same type of research comparing children with Down syndrome who are exposed to one versus two languages. The research is showing that they can develop their language milestones at the same rate, regardless of hearing one versus two languages. They can learn vocabulary just as easily or with as much difficulty. These are children with Down syndrome. So we're talking about children with intellectual impairment. It's not easy, but it's not harder when they're hearing two languages. Same thing with children with developmental language disorder. Of course, language is hard for them. That's their area of difficulty. But it's not harder when they're hearing two languages. Here we have the research on children with autism spectrum disorder. The severity of the autism spectrum disorder does not change if they're exposed to two languages. Their language milestones are not any different. Their ability to learn vocabulary is not any different. So we have studies looking at children speaking English and Spanish versus English only or Spanish only. We have another study looking at 9 different languages overall in that one study by Hambly and Fonban. We have another study looking at children who are all learning English and or Chinese, and same results. The other bilingual children are doing just as well as the monolingual children. And this is interesting because despite that, another systematic review demonstrated that parents are almost systematically counseled out of bilingual situations when their children have this profile. Here we have 2 very recent studies done by Aparna Nadig at McGill University showing that children with autism spectrum disorder who are exposed to 2 languages may have slight advantages in certain areas. So the first study was a verbal fluency task where the students had to name as many items from a given category as possible within 1 minute. The bilingual children with autism spectrum disorder did this better than the monolingual children. The other task was a cognitive flexibility task where the students were asked to sort items by color on a computer. Press this key if it's blue and press the key on the right if it's red, for example. They were doing this and then the examiners came in and said, okay, stop. Now we're going to switch tasks. You're going to have to sort them by shape. And we know the children with autism spectrum disorder don't love switching tasks. You know, they're very happy to continue the same task. And this study demonstrated that the children who were bilingual were able to switch tasks more easily than the monolingual children. So we're beyond, you know, can they handle the bilingualism? We're saying not only can they handle the bilingualism, but it looks like there are certain advantages to being bilingual for these risk populations. We also have studies looking at French immersion and students with developmental language disorder in French immersion versus English only program. No significant difference between the 2 groups of children in terms of academic outcome. Then we have similar studies, but in other parts of the world, looking at students with learning or developmental disabilities, looking at their outcomes in reading, math, science, history. And again, no significant difference whether a student is in immersion versus non-immersion programs. So whether you're exposed to 2 languages through your home or you're learning a second language through schooling, there is no research evidence that this will exacerbate your difficulties. Here we have, again, similar to the studies with autism spectrum disorder, this study looks at when you have dyslexia, are you disadvantaged if you are an English language learner? So we're talking about kids in English school. but some of the kids with dyslexia speak another language as a first language, and they're going to English school. And some of the kids with dyslexia are only exposed to English both at home and at school. And what this researcher, Linda Siegel, was able to demonstrate is that it appears that the students who were in total exposed to 2 languages were less severely affected than the students who were exposed to only 1 language in the area. So they were doing better in terms of reading, writing, phonological processing, and syntactic awareness. So again, maybe a slight advantage to having an additional language